My name is Diana Calder. I am 58 years old, and I own a ranch in New Mexico that has been in my late husband's family for 4 generations. Most days, my work is simple: water, soil, keys, and gates. But the night my son got married, everything I thought I knew about motherhood shattered in front of hundreds of witnesses. If you were in my shoes, standing there with your dignity in one hand and your son's future in the other, what would you have done? Would you have stayed silent? Or would you have raised your voice? Think about it as you follow my story. I arrived at the wedding wearing a soft blue-gray dress. I had chosen the color because my husband Jonah always told me, "You look like the morning sky in that shade." Mason, our only son, was my pride. He used to run barefoot across that ranch, pretend the irrigation ditch was a river full of gold. I believed that no matter how far life carried him, he would never forget his roots or his mother. But that night, I realized how deeply I could be wrong. The moment I walked into the reception hall, I felt eyes slide toward me like knives. The Whitakers, Sloane's family, looked at me as if I had brought mud in from the pasture. Sloane herself, standing near the sweetheart table, tightened her smile when she saw me. Gold sequins glittered on her dress, sparkling like she was made of money. She leaned toward Mason and whispered something behind her champagne glass. His jaw clenched. I tried not to think too much of it. Weddings are stressful. People talk. I found my seat, tucked near the back. I told myself I didn't mind. I was happy for him. That should have been enough. It started with small things. A bridesmaid asking if I meant to wear that color. A groomsman joking that the ranch must be cute. Sloane walked over once, brushing non-existent dust off my shoulder as she said, "We just wanted the focus on us tonight. You understand, right?" Her voice sounded sweet, but her fingers pressed a little too hard. Then came the moment that would change everything. The DJ tapped the microphone to announce toasts. Glasses clinked. Everyone laughed. I stayed quiet. I didn't need attention. I didn't need a spotlight. But Sloane looked at me like my silence itself was a crime. She whispered something sharp again. Mason's face reddened. He set down his glass and marched toward me. "Mom," he hissed. "What are you even doing here?" I blinked. "It's your wedding." I thought, "No, you're trying to steal the spotlight. You always do." I didn't understand. I opened my mouth to explain, to tell him I only came to wish him happiness. But then he raised his voice. He didn't check the microphone still clipped to his collar, feeding every word into the speakers. "Leave. You're not welcome." The entire hall went silent. Hundreds of eyes turned on me. Some widened in shock. Others smirked. A few guests looked away, pretending they hadn't heard what everyone had. And my son, the baby I once rocked beside the cottonwoods, looked at me like I was a stain on his perfect evening. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. The room seemed to tilt. For a heartbeat, I thought I might fall. Sloane stood behind him, her hand resting triumphantly on her new husband's shoulder, a queen who had conquered her final threat. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. Dignity doesn't need volume. I slid my hand into my small purse, feeling for the metal weight I always carried, the old ring of keys to the ranch. Cold, solid, mine. I stood, lifted my chin, and walked toward the exit. My heels tapped across the polished floor, echoing louder than any scream I could have given. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered that I must have done something awful to deserve this. Miriam, my closest neighbor, rose from her seat as if she might follow me. But I shook my head. She stopped, eyes full of worry, but she respected my decision. Rafe, my landkeeper, stood near the doors. He stepped aside, tipping his hat slightly, a gesture of loyalty that felt like a hand placed gently on my spine. When I reached the doorway, I turned for just a moment. Mason's face softened like he might regret it. But Sloane tugged his arm, smiling for the guests again, and he turned back to her without hesitation. I stepped out into the night air. The music kept playing behind me, muffled through the walls. They replaced my humiliation with another pop song, another toast. The world didn't pause just because my heart did. Outside, I breathed in the scent of desert wind. I wrapped my fingers around the keys again. I remembered my husband's voice. This land is our promise to our son. I wondered whether Mason even wanted that promise anymore, or if Sloane had convinced him to want something shinier. Just before I reached my truck, I heard laughter explode inside the hall. My tears came hot, but they didn't fall. Not a single one would touch the ground because of what had happened in there. They might have thrown me out, but the keys were still in my hands. As I drove away, headlights cutting through the darkness, I didn't slam the door. I didn't speed. I didn't curse. Rage is loud. Hurt is quiet. But silence can move mountains given time. That night, I lay in my bed staring at the familiar ceiling beams Jonah carved years ago. I replayed Mason's words. How quickly love can twist into something else when pride and fear take the wheel. I didn't sleep. And just when the sun began to brush the sky with pale light, my phone rang. His number. The son who had screamed at me to leave. The son who vowed I was not welcome in his new life. The son who had broken his mother publicly without blinking. Mom, he stammered, voice hoarse. I need the ranch keys. I held the phone to my ear. My hand didn't shake. My voice was steady as stone. You'll get them, I said. When you deserve them. The silence that followed was heavier than the wedding hall had ever been. I ended that call without waiting for my son to respond. I set the phone down on the nightstand, its screen still glowing like a small accusation in the dark. The keys lay beside it, their metal edges catching the first thin line of sunrise. I stared at them and breathed slowly, reminding myself that silence could be strength and that even a mother must have boundaries. He had called for one reason. Not love, not regret, not even fear of losing me. What Mason wanted was access, my ranch, my land, my gates. He wanted the very thing he told me to leave behind at his wedding. The phone buzzed again. I watched it vibrate against the wood. Finally, I answered, holding the device just far enough from my ear that his desperation couldn't cling to me. Mason, I said. Mom, please. The workers need the well systems turned on today. The irrigation lines, I already sent the maintenance schedules to you last month, I replied. You said you didn't need help. He hesitated. His breath hitched. Someone whispered behind him. A woman's voice. Her voice. Even from a distance, I recognized Sloane's tone, soft like honey, sharp like wire. Mason, she urged in the background. Tell her the truth. Suddenly, his voice lowered, almost a confession. We have an appointment at the ranch later, for planning. Investors want to inspect the property. Just unlock the gate, okay? We'll handle the rest. Investors. Planning. That word alone made my fingers curl around the phone. I stopped him before he could justify any further. You told me I wasn't welcome, I said. Do you believe those words only last one night? I could practically hear him recoil. My question sat heavily in the air between us. Mason, I continued quietly, when you deserve them, you'll have the keys. He didn't respond, only breathed. Then the line went dead. and I was alone again. The silence in my home that morning was a different kind from the night before. Less painful, more determined. I made coffee, strong and dark. I stepped out onto the porch and let the desert morning greet me. The cottonwoods rustled. The canal whispered beneath its concrete cover. The land I loved so deeply felt unchanged, even though my heart had shifted overnight. Rafe arrived around 8, boots dusted with sand, hat tipped low. Loyal as always. He had been up before dawn checking the levees. "You heard?" I asked. He gave a slow nod. "News travels faster than wind in this town." I managed a tired smile. "I suppose it does." "You all right, Diana?" he asked gently. "I will be." It was the closest I could come to honesty without letting my pain spill over. Rafe pointed his chin toward the keys in my hand. "Those are heavier today." "Yes," I whispered. "They are." He didn't push. He simply waited for instruction, because loyalty sometimes means respecting silence. I told him to handle the regular rounds. Check the gates, check the pumps, check the north fence where cattle tended to nudge through. He nodded and left in that quiet, steady way of his. A few minutes later, I saw a familiar figure marching up the dirt road that led to my porch. Miriam Ortega. She moved with purpose, one hand clutching a small casserole dish, the other waving indignantly in the air long before she reached me. "That boy of yours has lost his mind," she declared before stepping up onto my porch. She shoved the dish into my arms. "You probably haven't eaten." "Miriam." "No, don't you try to explain it. Everyone saw, and everyone is talking." Her voice cracked. "How could he do that to you? On his wedding day?" I pressed my lips together, swallowing the words that wanted to spill out. Because mothers defend their children until their very bones can't hold them up, even when those children cause the wounds. Miriam's eyes softened. She placed her hand over mine, grounding me. "You did nothing wrong," she whispered. Wrong. The word echoed like an empty church bell in my mind. Was it wrong to hope? Wrong to trust? Wrong to love a son so much that you blind yourself to the shifting ground beneath your feet? No, loving too much is not a crime, but letting yourself be destroyed might be. We sat together for a moment, listening to the sound of hooves in the distance. My 2 remaining horses still roamed near the south paddock. Jonah used to say they were like our guardians, always watching the land even when we slept. "He'll come around," Miriam muttered. "Everyone makes mistakes at weddings. Too much pressure. Too much noise." I ran my thumb along the metal edge of my key ring. There were 12 keys in total, 12 locks to protect what mattered most, 12 reasons to remain steady. "He didn't just make a mistake," I said quietly. "He made a choice." Miriam looked away, blinking back her own feelings. I suspected she saw more clearly than I did, and yet she still held space for me to reach my own truth. The day stretched on. The sun rose higher. Rafe returned with his reports. Everything secure. The land was steady even if the family was not. Then, around noon, a car slowed near the ranch's front gate. A black SUV, fancy chrome trim, too polished for country roads. The driver's window rolled down, and Sloane leaned out, large designer sunglasses hiding her eyes. She didn't call out to me, didn't wave, didn't even pretend to smile. She simply tapped her watch twice, pointed toward the locked gate, and then lifted her phone as if threatening that a single call could reorder my entire world. But I stood my ground on the porch, holding the keys loosely in my fist. She eventually drove off. Dust followed, the kind of dust that clings to everything it touches. I didn't chase after her. I didn't respond to the phone when it buzzed 5 minutes later. I chose stillness. Stillness can be a wall no storm can break. Late afternoon painted the land gold. Shadows stretched long and thin across the dirt. The chill of evening crept in early, as autumn often does here. I sat on the porch steps, watching the sky shift. I felt something inside me settle. Not peace, not forgiveness, just resolve. A steady heartbeat of determination that I never knew I had, but always needed. My son might beg. He might yell. He might lie to my face with a smile because someone else told him to. But those keys were not just metal. They were guardians of memory, sweat, love, and the legacy of a man who built something with his own 2 hands. When you take something that precious for granted, you lose the right to hold it. That night, before locking the door, I placed the key ring on the table beside Jonah's old photograph. His eyes crinkled in that familiar way, as if reminding me of the strength he always saw in me. "I'm still here," I whispered to the picture. "And so is the ranch." The morning after the wedding felt different. The light looked the same. The air carried the same desert scent. But inside my chest, something had shifted. That shift told me it was time to reopen places I had avoided since Jonah died. In the corner of my bedroom stood the old safe. It was built into the wall, a sturdy relic Jonah's grandfather installed long before I ever stepped foot on this ranch. The metal was cool under my fingertips as I brushed away a thin veil of dust. The combination was muscle memory. I dialed it slowly, like breathing in and out. Each number another step back into the years we built together. Click. The safe door opened with a soft sigh, as if it, too, had been holding its breath since Jonah's funeral. Inside were documents I had protected for 3 years, property deeds, trust papers, and a single sealed envelope marked in Jonah's handwriting. He had written my name in blue ink. Diana. Nothing more, nothing less. Simple. Just like him. My hands trembled as I picked it up. I sat on the edge of the bed and pressed the envelope to my heart first before opening it. I wasn't ready for what might spill out of it. Sometimes love hurts more in memory than it ever did in life. When I finally tore the seal, I recognized his scent. Cedar oil and sun-warmed cotton. I had forgotten how comforting ink and paper could be. His handwriting flowed across the page like a familiar voice. My love, if you are reading this, it means I couldn't keep my promise to walk beside you any longer. But you are stronger than you think, stronger than I ever was. The ranch belongs to you, not just by law, but because you are its heart. I know Mason will grow, but he will also be tempted by people who see the land only as profit. If anyone ever tries to take the keys from you, remember this. You are the gate. You decide who enters and who walks away. If our son forgets that, help him remember who you are. Yours always. Jonah. The tears came then, sudden and quiet. They slid down my cheeks, dripping onto the page like punctuation marks on a sentence that would never be finished. For 3 years, I had kept that letter locked away because reading it felt like losing him all over again. But today, it felt like he was reaching across time to steady me. I refolded the paper carefully and placed it back inside the envelope. I held it for a long moment before returning it to the safe. As I did, something else caught my eye. Legal documents detailing the stewardship of the land. Jonah had insisted that although ownership would be shared with Mason one day, the right to manage, protect, and decide the ranch's fate belonged solely to me. I ran my hand along the heavy metal of the safe door. The weight of it no longer frightened me. Instead, it grounded me. Downstairs, I brewed tea. The steam reminded me of mornings when Jonah and I would drink together in comfortable silence. I wondered if Mason remembered those mornings. I wondered if Sloane had rewritten those memories into something small and inconvenient. My phone buzzed again. A message from Mason. "We really need access today." Then another. "Why are you doing this?" And one more. The most painful. "You don't care about your own family." I put the phone face down. Hurting me came so easily to him now. A knock sounded on the door. It was Arthur Bell, my attorney. Tall, silver hair, eyes sharp like someone who had seen too many betrayals go through court. He carried his briefcase the way a soldier carries a shield. "I came as quickly as I could," he said. "This wasn't urgent," I replied, though we both knew it was. Arthur took a slow breath, studying my expression. "I saw what happened online." I flinched. Someone must have recorded the moment Mason yelled with that microphone still on. A piece of humiliation, now public property. Arthur continued, "Diana, I want you to be prepared. If they are desperate for control, they might try to argue that you're no longer capable of managing the ranch." "You mean claim I'm unstable?" The word tasted bitter. "Or unfit. Or forgetful. Anyone can try to make a parent look weak if there's money behind it." I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. "Jonah planned for that," I said, voice firm. "He gave me the authority, and I have documents proving it." Arthur nodded. "Exactly why we need to strengthen defenses, make copies, store them off-site, and schedule a medical competency evaluation as soon as possible. We don't give them an inch." We walked to the safe together. I showed him the documents. When he saw the envelope, he paused. "Jonah was a wise man," he murmured. "Yes," I whispered. "He always was." Arthur began scanning each page with a cold efficiency that made me feel both protected and terrified. Protection only becomes necessary when danger is real. When he finished, he locked the files inside his case. "These stay with me now, and I'll arrange the rest." I thanked him. He left, promising to return tomorrow with paperwork and new strategies. Strategies for what? For defending my own life's work from my own son? As the screen door shut behind him, the house felt too quiet again, too wide, too full of ghosts and questions I didn't know how to answer. Later in the afternoon, Rafe returned to check the irrigation system. He tapped the barometer and nodded toward the west. "Storm's coming," he said. I glanced at the horizon. Clouds were gathering, thick and stubborn. "Let it rain," I said. "The land can handle storms." Rafe gave me a long look, as if he knew I meant more than the weather. When the first drops hit the porch, I stood outside, letting them speckle my skin. The earth below darkened with each drop, drinking deeply. I realized how similar we were. Land and woman. We endure what comes. We heal in time. And I would heal. I locked the door for the night, placing the keys and Jonah's letter back beside my bed. The storm outside rattled the windows, thunder rolling like hooves across the sky. But inside, I felt a steadiness forming. He threw me out of his wedding. He tried to take what was never his to command, and the next morning, he begged for the keys. When you are the gate, silence becomes armor. Tomorrow, I told myself, the real fight begins. By the fourth day after the wedding, I had learned something valuable. Silence makes certain people furious. I didn't shout, didn't argue, didn't explain. I just existed on my land and protected what was mine. And somehow, that was enough to provoke a war. I wanted peace. but they came for battle. It was meant to be a dinner to reconcile. Mason texted early in the morning. "We want to come over tonight, talk things through." His message sounded like it had been edited twice by someone standing beside him, someone with manicured fingers and a plan already drawn in her mind. I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. Dinner at 6. Part of me hoped my son would look me in the eyes and remember the boy who once clung to my hand when thunderstorms shook the windows. The bigger part of me knew this visit had nothing to do with love. I spent the afternoon preparing a meal I used to make for Mason on his birthdays: green chili stew and skillet bread. The kind of food only New Mexico mothers know how to make by instinct. Food you cook with your heart even when it's broken. When the knock finally came, my pulse jumped. Mason stood on the porch in a crisp white shirt, eyes shifting around like he was afraid of being seen here. Sloane was at his side in a sleek cream dress, hair perfectly curled as if she was attending another formal event instead of walking into the home she had helped exile me from. She smiled at me with teeth so white they almost glowed. "Diana," she said sweetly, as if nothing had ever happened. I nodded once. "Dinner is ready." We sat at the wooden table Jonah built decades ago. The plates were old but polished. My hands were steady as I served them. Sloane chewed delicately, as if every bite was being judged by invisible critics. "This stew is rustic," she said. Mason didn't look up. For a while, we all pretended to be civilized. We talked about nothing of substance: weather, work, wedding gifts. It felt like walking barefoot over broken glass while pretending the floor was smooth. Halfway through the meal, Sloane dabbed her lips with a napkin and smiled at me like a cat smiles at a cornered mouse. "I hope we can put the other night behind us," she said. "Families fight. Weddings are stressful. I'm sure you didn't mean to make us uncomfortable." I froze with my fork halfway to my mouth. "I made you uncomfortable?" "You did," she replied softly. "Showing up in that dress. Cameras were everywhere. People whispered." She sighed dramatically. "But it's a new day." My blood turned colder than the iced tea on the table. I looked at Mason. He looked away. That was when I understood. This wasn't an apology dinner. This was a performance. Sloane wanted me to play the part of the guilty mother who apologizes just to keep her son close. I stayed silent. And when silence offers no footing, manipulators slip. Sloane's smile tightened. She excused herself to the restroom. Her high heels clicked down the hall. A few seconds later, I realized she went the wrong direction. My bedroom. My heart stuttered. I kept my chin still and breathed slowly through my nose. Mason took a long sip of tea, pretending he didn't notice the disappearing act his wife just performed. Or maybe he did notice, but chose to sit still. "Stay here," I said quietly as I stood. The hallway felt longer than usual. Shadows stretched along the floor, following me like warnings. My bedroom door was cracked open just enough for me to see movement inside. I pushed it gently. Sloane was standing in front of the safe. My safe. The safe I opened for the first time since Jonah died, just days ago. Her fingers hovered over the keypad, wiping something off the handle with a small piece of cloth. She spun around when she heard the door. Her expression flipped instantly from focused to falsely surprised. "Oh," she gasped. "I was just looking for the bathroom. These hallways are confusing." Her performance was flawless, except for the smudge of oil gleaming on her fingertips. I stepped forward, calm as winter stone. "The bathroom is the other way," I said. "You passed it by 30 feet. She laughed, airy and insincere. "Silly me." Before she could slip past, I noticed a tiny detail at her feet, a small black square on the floor near the dresser. I knelt, picked it up. A micro SD card. Mine. From the hallway, security camera I installed last year. My stomach clenched. She hadn't been here long, but long enough. Sloane smiled again, but her eyes betrayed irritation that I saw what she dropped. That must have fallen out of Mason's pocket earlier, she offered. He's always tinkering with electronics. The lie was paper thin. Her expression dared me to confront her. She wanted me angry. If I raised my voice, if I lost control even once, she could twist that into proof. Proof that I was unstable. Proof that I was unfit to manage the ranch. Proof that the keys belonged in someone else's hands. I breathed in. The scent of cedar from the safe filled my lungs, reminding me who I was, who Jonah believed I could be. I handed the micro SD card back to her. It must have, I said quietly. Her eyes narrowed, confused by my lack of fire. I stepped aside. Dinner is getting cold. She walked past me stiffly, heels tapping faster now. When we returned, Mason looked up, sensing something had shifted. Everything had shifted. After they left, the house felt violated. I locked every door, every window. I touched the keypad of the safe and felt faint fingerprints left behind by a woman who thought she could own the world if she smiled hard enough. I checked the hallway camera. The feed was blank for the last 20 minutes. She had known exactly where to go, what to remove. That meant someone had guided her. As I finished cleaning dishes, the sky outside turned the color of steel. The wind howled softly through the cottonwoods, and those leaves trembled like they knew trouble was only beginning. When I finally went upstairs to bed, I paused in the doorway and stared at the safe. I whispered into the dark, I will not let you rewrite this family. Because the moment she stepped into my bedroom uninvited, she had crossed a line deeper than the canyon ridge behind the ranch. I lay awake most of the night, listening to the house breathe. The walls felt protective, the ceilings familiar, but under the calm surface, danger was shifting like sand in a storm. This was no longer a misunderstanding, no longer hurt feelings or a wedding gone wrong. This was an invasion, and I would answer it my way. Morning sunlight crept across the wooden floorboards, but it brought no warmth. I stood in the kitchen holding a cup of coffee I barely tasted, watching steam curl into the air like a restless spirit. Last night replayed in my mind like a slow burn. The safe, the missing card, her smile. People don't dig through a woman's bedroom if they come for reconciliation. They dig because they think she's weak enough not to stop them. I placed the cup down and took a long breath. It was time to stop hoping things would get better on their own. Hope is a beautiful thing, but it can be a trap if you cling to it long after someone has shown you who they are. At 9 sharp, Arthur Bell arrived. He rarely wasted time, and today he looked like a storm in a tailored suit. I reviewed the footage you sent earlier, he said as he stepped inside. There is no footage, I replied. She took the micro SD card. Arthur stared at me for a long moment. I could almost see the gears in his mind turning. He set down his briefcase on the kitchen table with a decisive thud. They're building a case, he said. I'm certain of it now. Removing the camera card proves intent. They're preparing to claim you're mentally or legally incapable of managing the ranch. Once they establish that narrative, they'll move for guardianship or even emergency control. Guardianship. The word hung in the air like a curse. They would make me a ward of my own son, I whispered. Arthur gave a single, heavy nod. It wouldn't be the first time a family tried to take property this way. I've seen mothers pushed out of their own lives because someone convinced a court they needed protection. His mouth tightened. We will not let that happen to you. I folded my arms across my chest, anger warming the places fear had chilled. What do we do? He opened his briefcase and laid out folders, each one a shield, a plan, a defense built from ink and law. First, he said, we document everything, every word, every visit, every attempt to coerce or manipulate. Second, we secure duplicates of all legal documents and move them off the property. Third, you undergo a standard mental competency evaluation on your terms with a reputable physician. I'm not sick, I said, and they know that. But courts need proof. We show stability before they try to paint chaos. I nodded slowly. Who do you recommend? I've already contacted Dr. Menon. Your appointment is tomorrow morning. I closed my eyes, letting my forehead rest in my palm. I never imagined my own son would put me through this. Arthur softened just a bit. People don't always know when they're being used as weapons. The words landed hard. Mason wasn't the mastermind. I knew that. The puppet master wore designer heels and smiled while she stole from my bedroom. What else? I asked. Arthur pointed at the safe. You keep the original documents here for now, but we'll place copies in a safety deposit box today. Colt at the bank already agreed to accommodate us. The plan was forming. It was painful, but it was necessary. Then he added something that made my blood run cold. And I'm filing a notice of potential exploitation with the court. It doesn't accuse them of wrongdoing, but it tells the legal system we're watching. He slid the papers toward me. The header read, Vulnerable Adult Protection Measures. My name sat below it. I'm not vulnerable, I said, voice sharp as broken glass. No, Arthur replied, meeting my eyes. But they want the court to think you are. We're simply staying ahead. I hesitated only a moment before signing. Ink dried, becoming armor. Rafe arrived just as Arthur was gathering his folders. His boots tracked in dust from the porch and his eyes carried worry. I found something, he said quietly, setting a small object on the table. A thin glove, latex, smudged with makeup foundation. The kind makeup artists use when they don't want to leave fingerprints. It had been hidden in the irrigation shed, a place only workers or intruders would go. Arthur leaned closer. Not a coincidence. Rafe pulled his hat lower, frustration etched into the lines of his face. You tell me what you need, Diana. I'm here. My home was searched, I said, and someone tried to erase the evidence. I need vigilance. He nodded once. They won't reach that safe again. Miriam stopped by in the afternoon, carrying a bag of groceries. She tried not to show her worry, but her eyes kept drifting to the keys in my hand. People are whispering, she warned gently. Some say you caused a scene at the wedding. Others say Mason was drunk or angry. Nobody agrees. But everyone has an opinion. I smiled sadly. Small towns thrive on opinions. But truth? Truth is quieter, she said. And it's on your side. Her words slid into the wounded places in me and stitched something small but strong. By evening, Arthur returned with a sealed envelope from the notary. Fresh stamps, fresh signatures, layers upon layers of protection. He told me not to be afraid. I wasn't afraid. I was angry. And anger, handled right, can become a shield instead of a weapon. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in bruised colors, I stood at the gate of the ranch. The keys felt solid in my hand. The padlock clicked shut with the certainty of a final decision. They had crossed a line. They had broken into my safe space. They had tried to erase my defenses, but they underestimated something crucial. A mother may bend, but she does not break, especially not when her love becomes protection. If they wanted a war over land and legacy, I would give them one, and I would do it without raising my voice. The following morning, I sat at the long wooden table Jonah had built years ago, my fingers loosely wrapped around a mug of tea that had already gone cold. The air felt heavy, like the land itself was waiting for something to shift. I looked out through the kitchen window at the dusty road leading to the ranch gate, and for a moment, I wondered if Jonah would have known what to do long before things had turned rotten. He always saw people more clearly than I did. At exactly 10, a white SUV pulled up outside the porch. Expensive, shiny, a vehicle meant to be seen. Sloane stepped out of the passenger side gracefully, like she was stepping onto a movie set rather than dirt and gravel. She didn't wait to be invited before coming to the door. I opened it only halfway. "Morning, Diana," she said brightly, holding a bapao folder pressed to her chest like a peace offering. "I brought something I think you'll love." Her confidence was unsettling, but I had learned something since the wedding. Quiet women often make loud women nervous, so I stayed quiet. She stepped inside without my permission. Her heels clacked against the floor like tiny hammers. "I know things have been tense," she began, "and I truly want to make things right." She opened the folder with a practiced flourish. "Mason and I have been working on a proposal for the ranch." I raised my eyebrow. "A proposal?" "Yes." She spread out glossy renderings on the table. "We want to open the ranch as a wedding and event venue. It's the perfect location, rustic yet elegant. We'd keep the heritage theme, of course, but with a modern twist. Guests would pay a premium." She tapped the image of a newly renovated barn, white lights strung along the beams. It looked nothing like Jonah's barn. No dust, no history, no soul. "It would bring in money. A lot of money," Sloane continued. "Think of it as securing Mason's future. And yours." "My future is already secure," I said. Her smile flickered. "Well, Mason's then. He needs this. With the debts from his last business and the medical bills for my sister's treatment." She let her voice break, just slightly. "You have no idea how hard it has been." There it was. Vulnerability as strategy. I wasn't heartless. I knew medical debt could crush anyone in this country. But pity can be a dangerous emotion to weaponize. "And all you need," she added gently, "is to give us full access. Keys, codes, the whole property." So that was the real point. Control. I kept my voice even. "And if I say no?" She exhaled dramatically, as though I had disappointed her deeply. "Diana," she said, her tone dripping with patient condescension, "I know you've been under a lot of stress. Maybe more than you realize." Ah, there it was. The threat dressed as concern. She slid a hand across the table, fingers brushing the edge of my mug. "We have an architect coming to inspect the barn in 72 hours, she said. "If we delay, the investor might walk. And I don't want Mason to lose everything." Again, she stood taller, like a queen making a decree. "So please, be reasonable." For a moment, the room went absolutely still. My breath felt heavy in my chest. My mind flashed back to Jonah's letter, his words anchoring me. "You are the gate." "I am being reasonable," I replied calmly. "But I will not give you the keys." Her lips tightened, but she kept smiling. "You're making a mistake." She gathered the papers quickly, like she couldn't stand for them to be on my table another second. Then she looked me straight in the eyes. "You have 72 hours, she said. After that, things will move forward with or without your consent." She spun on her heels and walked to the door with that same cold elegance. "Mason will call you tonight," she added over her shoulder. "And when he does, I hope for his sake that you'll think of the family you could save." The door slammed just a bit too hard behind her. Her SUV sped off, kicking up a cloud of dust that hung in the air long after she was gone. I stood in the doorway, inhaling grit and anger. I stared out toward the gates, remembering tiny fingerprints on those metal bars years ago when Mason was small enough to swing from them. "Sweeter than honey," I murmured to myself, thinking of Sloane's perfect exterior. But honey can hide a poisoned sting. I reached for the keys at my hip and felt their familiar weight. I turned to look at Jonah's picture on the wall, his eyes kind yet strong. "I'm not giving up this land," I said aloud, my voice steady. "Not for money, not for lies, and not because someone thinks they can scare me into a corner." I walked out to the front porch, letting the wind brush past me like a whisper from generations before me. 72 hours, that was their deadline, but I had already decided the answer. The gate would remain locked, and the woman holding the keys was not afraid of the countdown that had just begun. The next morning, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing my hair with deliberate calm. Today was not about emotions. Today was about documentation, evidence, truth. If Sloane and Mason wanted to question my competence, I would give them the answer in ink and signatures, not pleading words. I buttoned a light denim shirt, sturdy and simple. Jonah used to say I dressed like the land I loved, practical, weatherproof, and not here to impress anyone. It felt right to carry that into today. Rafe drove me into town in his old pickup. The radio hummed quietly with a country station. He didn't speak much, but every now and then, I caught him looking at me from the corner of his eye, making sure I wasn't crumbling. I wasn't. I was solid granite today. At the clinic, Dr. Priya Menon greeted us with a calm smile and warm eyes. She had been my doctor for over a decade. If aging had changed me, she had seen every stage and never once questioned my clarity. "Let's run through the evaluations," she said gently, leading me into her office. The tests were simple enough: memory recall, orientation, comprehension, problem solving. She asked me to draw a clock, recite a list of words, subtract by sevens. I answered every question cleanly, my voice steady, my handwriting sure. She asked about my daily routines, my responsibilities, the ranch. I spoke with pride and precision. The land may have bruised my heart, but it had not dimmed my mind. Dr. Menon scribbled notes, occasionally glancing at me like she already knew the outcome. "Diana," she said when we finished, "you are perfectly capable, more than capable. You're resilient, grounded." She handed me a signed competency certificate, embossed and stamped, proof that no one could twist my strength into weakness. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. Colt Ramirez, the bank manager, was next. His building sat right on Main Street, bright brick and clean glass. He shook my hand warmly. "Always a pleasure, Mrs. Calder," Colt said. We walked into a private room where he opened a polished metal safety deposit box. Rafe stood just outside the door like a quiet guardian. Inside the box, I placed copies of every document Arthur had prepared: the trust agreement, the stewardship rights, Jonah's directives, and the new filings. I also added the binder of expenses and property maps that charted every irrigation line and fence post on the ranch. This is the backup for the backup, Colt said with a nod. No one will access it without you. The safe clicked shut with a finality that made my shoulders relax for the first time in days. As we stepped back outside, the wind had picked up, sending leaves tumbling down the street. The air carried the crisp smell of coming rain. It's a good day for truth, Rafe said quietly. I smiled at him, grateful for his steady presence. It is. On the drive home, my phone buzzed. A text from Miriam. Saw a strange black Jeep circling near the north fence last night. Thought you should know. My stomach tightened. The surveillance equipment? I asked Rafe. Checked it this morning, he said. Feed cut out for 10 minutes around midnight. The same window when Sloan had removed the camera card in my house. Patterns were forming, the kind of patterns that pointed straight to intent. When we pulled into the ranch, clouds cast long shadows across the property. Before heading inside, I walked to the main gate and ran my fingers across the metal bars. Down low, near the hinge, I noticed faint tire tracks in the dirt. New ones. Someone had been here, waiting, watching. Inside the house, I hung the keys back on the hook near the kitchen. Their metallic clink echoed through the quiet room, a small reminder of control. Arthur arrived later in the afternoon, his briefcase tucked under his arm. He reviewed the documents Dr. Menon gave me and smiled, satisfied. This will shut down their accusations before they can even form the sentence, he said. Rafe and I exchanged relieved glances, but Arthur wasn't done. We must assume they'll escalate, he warned. People willing to manipulate family for property rarely stop at one attempt. It was true. Sloan had shown her willingness to cross boundaries, personal, legal, emotional. She wasn't after the ranch because she loved it. She wanted what it could become with enough money thrown at it. Something shiny, something that erased history. Rain finally began to pour, drumming against the roof like impatient fists. I stood at the window watching water sluice down the glass. The irrigation ditches would be full by morning, feeding the land the way Jonah had always wanted. Rafe got ready to leave, pulling his jacket tight against the storm. Before stepping out, he paused. You passed every test today, he said. Not for them, for yourself. His faith in me was a gift I hadn't known I needed. That night, the last thing I heard was the wind brushing through the cottonwoods, whispering against the dark. The ranch was quiet, secure, and strong. I locked the door, checked every window, and turned off the lights. But when I lay in bed, I didn't think about the threats, or the deadlines, or the storm. I thought about the gate, and how it would remain locked, no matter who demanded otherwise. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the ranch glistening with dew. Sunlight filtered through the cottonwoods as if nothing dark had ever touched the land. But my phone, buzzing relentlessly on the table, said otherwise. Mason had been trying to reach me since dawn. 5 missed calls, 3 messages, all frantic. Please answer. This is important. Mom, we need to talk, now. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering but never pressing. It was astonishing how quickly a child could turn a mother's heart into a battlefield. At 9:07 a.m., the phone rang again. I answered before the first ring even finished, not because I was eager to hear him, but because I needed to face whatever came next with a steady voice. Mason? I said. He didn't speak right away. I heard shuffling, then shallow breathing. Finally, he said, We're coming over. There was a tremor in his voice. With legal representatives. My fingers tightened around the phone. Legal representatives? Before he could reply, a female voice cut in, smooth, confident, trained to dominate a room. "Good morning, Mrs. Calder. This is Attorney Jenna Pike, representing Mason and his wife. Will arrive in 30 minutes. Then the line went dead. I placed the phone down carefully, as if rough movement might trigger another explosion. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, the walls too close. I reached for the keys instinctively, grounding myself in the cold weight of metal. This wasn't a visit. It was an ambush. 28 minutes later, a convoy approached the gate. Black SUV, silver sedan, and Mason's truck bringing up the rear. The dust they stirred up looked like the wake of a storm returning. I stepped outside, shoulders square, feet planted. Whatever they had planned, I would not greet it from inside a locked house. Jenna Pike was the first to step out. Her heels stabbed into the dirt like she resented being anywhere that wasn't carpeted. She wore a tailored navy suit and a smile too polished to be sincere. A man followed, her co-counsel Evan Cross, with slicked back hair and a briefcase he carried like a weapon. Sloane got out next, adjusting her coat with movements rehearsed to perfection. She placed a hand on Mason's arm, guiding him forward like a marionette. "Mrs. Calder," Jenna began, flipping open a folder. "We're here to address the matter of property access." Sloane stepped closer, pressing a hand over her stomach in a gesture that made my eyes lock onto her instantly. "I'm pregnant," she whispered. My breath caught midair. Pregnant. The word echoed inside me, blooming into every corner of my heart before I could stop it. A grandchild. Jonah's lineage. A future I had secretly prayed for ever since the house became too quiet. But joy didn't have time to settle, because Sloane kept speaking. "And the baby's health depends on stability," she said, her voice trembling with just the right amount of practiced vulnerability. "We can't build a safe future if you hold the keys hostage." Hostage. They used that word deliberately. Legal ammunition disguised as concern. Mason finally looked at me then, his eyes wide and red-rimmed. "Mom, please," he said. "This child, he deserves everything. I need to protect my family." Family. The irony nearly split me in two. Evan stepped forward, placing a thick packet into my hands. "Assets must be secured for the child's benefit," he declared. "Given recent events, we are concerned that decisions made here could be driven by emotional instability." There it was, stabbed between the lines. Unstable, unfit, unreliable. I held the documents without reading a single word. "You think I would ever endanger my grandchild?" Jenna's smile sharpened. "We think oversight is appropriate. Guardianship of the ranch's major assets would give Mason the authority he needs as a parent." Guardianship. They were moving fast. Too fast. I felt something shift inside me. The pain of being discarded at the wedding had been sharp. But this was cold, calculated. A punch straight to the soul. Sloane's face softened with false comfort. "Mason just wants what's best. Your resistance is causing stress. Stress is dangerous for pregnancy." Her hand slid protectively over her stomach again, and Mason flinched as if the smallest breeze could hurt her. I could have exploded. I could have screamed at the injustice of turning motherhood into manipulation. But I had learned the power of choosing silence. I stepped back, looked to Mason, and spoke slowly, ensuring every word struck with the force of a hammer. "When you yelled at me to leave your wedding, I walked away without a word. Not because you deserved silence, but because I deserved peace." His eyes flickered. "And now you come with lawyers," I continued, "threatening the land your father died protecting, using a child, Your child, as leverage. Sloane cut in sharply. So you don't believe I'm pregnant? I didn't answer. She wanted denial. She wanted a fight. She wanted witnesses to my fury. I would give her nothing she could use. The sky above us rumbled, with distant thunder, as if the earth itself resented the lie twisting its air. I handed back the documents. No, just that. A single word spoken with the full strength of a woman who had finally stopped undervaluing her own worth. Sloane's smile shattered. Jenna snapped her folder closed hard enough to send dust flying. Mason looked at me like I had betrayed him, when it was he who had handed Sloane the knife. You're pushing us, Mom, he said softly. And I don't want this to get uglier. I felt my heart splinter, but I held firm. Then don't be the ones making it ugly. For a long moment, nobody moved. Finally, Jenna turned, signaling the retreat. They climbed back into their vehicles one by one. Sloane paused before shutting the door, fixing her stare on the keys at my waistband, like they were the center of the universe. This isn't over, she murmured. She was right. It was just beginning. As the convoy rolled away, dust swallowing their path, I pressed a hand to my chest and whispered into the wind. I will protect this child, even if I must protect him from his own parents. The ranch gate stood tall behind me, locked and steady, and so was I. That evening, the ranch felt unsettled. The storm that had passed yesterday seemed to leave its shadow behind, clinging to the corners of the house and whispering through the cottonwoods. I tried to distract myself by scrubbing the kitchen counters until they shined, but unease tugged at me like a sleeve. Rafe stopped by around dusk, his boots coated with fresh mud. He cleared his throat. Camera feed on the north fence cut out again last night, he said. Same time frame as before. Could be a coincidence, I offered, though the words felt hollow. He didn't bother pretending. Coincidences don't repeat. Problems do. We stood outside beneath a sky thick with low clouds, the sun fading into a bruised purple horizon. Rafe's jaw set firm as he stared at the fence line in the distance. We're being watched, he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. The keys at my hip suddenly felt like a target painted on my body. Keep every gate locked, Rafe warned. Extra chains if you need them. I'll run the night check. Thank you, I whispered. He tipped his hat and rode his ATV into the growing darkness, headlights bouncing across the uneven ground. Inside, I double-checked every lock, windows, doors, side entry. I moved through the house like a lighthouse keeper preparing for a violent storm at sea. Later, as I was turning down the sheets in my room, I caught a faint sound, almost like footsteps crunching over gravel. I froze. My heart thudded against my ribs, but I forced myself to listen. Silence followed, too thick to trust. Then, without warning, the entire house went black. Every light, every hum of electricity, gone. Only darkness and the roar of my pulse remained. I kept still, waiting for my eyes to adjust. The emergency light on the hallway camera should have kicked in, but nothing glowed. The backup battery on the gate system, also quiet. The power outage wasn't accidental. Someone had pulled the plug. I reached into my nightstand drawer, grabbing the flashlight. A soft beam cut through the dark and guided me downstairs. My footsteps were slow, careful, learning the floor all over again. I checked the breaker panel, switched off manually, every single one. That meant someone had been inside the utility room on the side of the house. My throat tightened. I turned the switches back on, heart pounding. A moment later, the lights flickered to life. The refrigerator hummed. The heater breathed again. But the camera system, still dead. A chill ran through me. Something was missing. I hurried to the storage room off the mudroom. The master key ring, used for maintenance buildings, barns, sheds, usually hung from a designated hook. The hook was empty. My heart plummeted. I tore through the shelves, through bins and tools and storage crates. Nothing. Gone. Someone had taken the master keys. No forced lock. No broken glass. Just quiet entry and quiet theft. I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself. Whoever had come in tonight knew exactly where to go and what to take. I grabbed my phone to call Rafe, but before I could dial, headlights flared through the front window. A vehicle crept along the driveway, tires crunching slowly. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Then I recognized the shape. Rafe's ATV. He rushed to the porch, pounding on the door. I opened it to find his face set tight with anger. "Jeep out by the ridge," he said, voice low and urgent. "Black, no plates." My stomach dropped. They were here. His eyes narrowed sharply. "What did they get?" "Master keys," I whispered. He swore under his breath and stomped mud across my floor as he moved to the utility area. He inspected the panel, then the sheds through the window. "They didn't take anything else," he observed. "Just the keys. This wasn't theft." His gaze hardened. This was preparation. We stood together, listening for any sign the intruders might return. But the night held its breath with us, silent and heavy. Rafe turned to me finally. "There's only one person on this ranch who has reason to access every building, every system." He didn't have to say the name. I thought of Tara Ung, loyal for years, but lately more nervous, more withdrawn. I'd seen the overdue notices stacked near her workstation a few weeks ago, credit cards screaming for payment, a target easy to buy. I felt betrayal settle into my bones like cold water. "We'll get them back," Rafe said firmly. "I'll handle the search tonight. You stay inside. Lock everything twice." "Be careful," I told him. He nodded once, then disappeared into the darkness again. The house shook faintly as thunder rumbled far away. The storm hadn't left after all. It was just gathering strength. I sat alone at the kitchen table, flashlight on standby, every nerve alert. Someone out there was planning to take everything from me. Not through kindness, not through negotiation, but through the dark. And now that they had keys, they thought they had power. But they forgot one thing. A locked gate means nothing without permission. And I don't give permission to thieves. The morning after the outage, the soil outside my window smelled of wet clay and fresh resilience. The cottonwoods still stood tall, shaking off the storm without complaint. Watching them, I felt that same resolve solidify in my own spine. If they wanted a fight, they'd get a lawful one. Arthur arrived just after sunrise, coat still damp from the mist outside. He set his briefcase on the dining table like a judge preparing a verdict. "I stayed up half the night reviewing options," he said. "It's time to protect the ranch permanently." I nodded. "Tell me what we need to do." He opened a folder stamped with a gold seal and slid it across the table. "This is the Heritage Stewardship Trust your husband drafted before Mason turned 21. We update and finalize it. The land cannot be sold. Not by you, not by Mason, not by anyone." I ran my hand over the embossed cover, feeling the weight of history pressing through the paper. Jonah had always believed the ranch should outlive us. Now, his plan would become ironclad. Arthur continued, "You will be recognized as the steward, full authority to manage, maintain, and protect the property for the next 40 years. "And Mason?" I asked quietly. "He remains a beneficiary, but one with conditions. He only receives profits if the land is used for cultural and educational benefit of the local community. If he tries to commercialize it for private gain, he gets nothing. My chest swelled with relief and grief all at once. Justice can ache like a healing wound. Arthur tapped a clause near the bottom. This prevents litigation. If he contests the document for any reason, he forfeits his share. A no contest clause. Jonah always did understand his son's weaknesses and strengths. Ambition could be shaped, but greed had to be fenced in. Rafe arrived within the hour to serve as witness, mud still clinging to his boots from the night patrol. Colt Ramirez from the bank joined soon after, briefcase in hand and purpose in his stride. Papers were signed, notarized, stamped. The sound of each seal hitting the page felt like thunder cracking through uncertainty. Colt carried out the trust records in a secure packet. "I'll store the primary file in the official vault," he said. "Only you and Arthur have authority." I exhaled, feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. The ranch was safe by law, at least on paper. While they worked, Miriam brought over fresh biscuits and coffee. She laid a comforting hand on my shoulder. "I always knew you had more strength than the rest of us combined," she murmured. I swallowed a knot in my throat. Strength is easier when the land holds you up. After the others left, the house grew quiet again. I stood by the window, watching the pastures ripple in the breeze like the ranch was breathing freely for the first time in days. Then my phone vibrated. A single text from an unknown number, 72 hours, tick-tock. My pulse clenched. The clock they set was still ticking. Countdown to what? I didn't know. Sloane's proposal required rapid action. They needed to get inside this ranch soon if they wanted to impress investors. But now, even if they forced their way in, the law itself stood guard. Yet desperation makes cunning people reckless. In the afternoon, I walked the property with Rafe. We checked every lock, every gate. He talked about water levels and storm damage. I nodded along, but my mind wandered to the stolen keys and the hands they might now be in. Hands that didn't respect boundaries. Hands that believed possession was victory. We reached the old barn, its wooden beams weathered by decades of sun. I touched the wall, imagining Mason here as a boy, learning to hammer nails beside his father, begging to ride the tractor, laughing when a calf nibbled his shoelaces. Where had that boy gone? Could greed and fear erase that much love? Rafe cleared his throat gently. "Paper protects you in court," he said. "But out here it's still muscle and grit." "I know," I responded. "This fight isn't over. Not by a long shot." When I returned home near sunset, I found an envelope wedged under the front door. My heart lurched as I looked around, but the yard was empty. Inside was a glossy brochure, renderings of the ranch transformed into a luxury resort, with a handwritten note across the bottom. Imagine what this could be. If you weren't in the way. No signature. I folded the paper once, twice, 3 times, then fed it into the fireplace and watched the flames erase every lie it promised. The keys were still at my side. The gates were still locked. And now the law stood with me. They thought they were cornering me into surrender, but they had only confirmed the truth. This land will not be sold, not while I have breath in my body. 3 days passed in uneasy silence. No more SUVs or lawyers. No more fake smiles coated in honey. Just quiet. Too quiet. The kind that lets shadows grow tall. I tried to keep my hands busy, mending tack in the barn, checking the orchard lines, sweeping the porch. But my thoughts circled the same truth like vultures. People planning to steal don't stop just because you stop answering their calls. Late in the afternoon, I heard footsteps approaching before a knock sounded on the door. When I opened it, I found Mason instead of his usual entourage. His face looked pale, tired, like sleep. Hadn't wanted him either. "Can I come in?" he asked, voice low. Part of me wanted to slam the door, keep the pain on the other side, but I stepped back instead, granting him entry. A mother's hope is stubborn like that. He lingered near the living room, eyes moving over the place like he was rediscovering his own childhood. The walls with our pictures, the coat rack Jonah built, the scuffs on the floor from Mason racing toy trucks when he was 5. "You made me chili stew once when I was sick," he said suddenly. I remember. The memory hit hard. "You were 7, I whispered. He nodded, almost smiling. Then his shoulders slumped. "Everything feels like it's going wrong." "Because it is," I said gently. "And because you're letting someone else steer the wrong turns." He rubbed his hands together, avoiding my stare. "I didn't know about the evaluations or the trust paperwork." He let out a humorless laugh. "Arthur is clever." "Jonah prepared it," I corrected softly. "He loved you, enough to protect you from choices you weren't ready to make." Something flickered in Mason's eyes. Fear, regret, shame. "I need to tell you something," he said, "but I want you to sit down first." My stomach tightened as I sank onto the couch. He remained standing, pacing like a caged thing. "I thought Sloane married me for love," he began. "But she's under pressure. There's someone else involved." "Harlan," I said. The name fell from my lips like a stone. Mason's head snapped up. "You know?" "I know someone has been pulling strings," I answered. "Someone who thinks this ranch is a business opportunity." Relief and devastation warred on his face. "Harlan financed her sister's medical care. He's been covering our bills. He has leverage. She owes him. And now you owe her." He swallowed hard. "It's worse than that. I signed a personal loan agreement. If the ranch isn't developed, Harlan can call it due. It's more money than I can ever repay." My heart clenched. My son had shackled himself with his own signature, out of fear, out of love for a woman who didn't love him back. "Mason," I whispered, "you didn't read the fine print." "No," he admitted, "because she said we were a team. She said the ranch would solve everything." And there it was, the tragedy of being young enough to believe a lie dressed as hope. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, and "Because I found something," he said, voice shaking. He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. Emails appeared. Between Sloane and the lawyers. Between Sloane and Harlan. Between Sloane and someone else entirely. "She planned all of this," he said, "before we even got engaged." Each message was a stab of truth sharper than the last. He doesn't understand his inheritance yet. Once the guardianship is filed, we can take control. She's old. She won't fight long. I inhaled sharply. "She never wanted me," Mason choked out. "She wanted the land. She just wanted me as the lock she could pick." I stood and put my hand on his shoulder. He flinched, then broke. "It was all a lie," he whispered. "Every smile, every promise." I wanted to hold him the way I did when scraped knees felt like the end of the world. But he was a grown man now, and wounds of betrayal cut deeper than childhood pain. "Your father once said, 'Love shouldn't cost you your soul,'" I murmured. Mason looked at me then, with a broken boy floating behind his adult features. "She's meeting Harlan tonight," he said, "at a hotel in town, to finalize something. I think they're replacing me." He handed me the phone, and for the first time, I saw exactly how close they had come to erasing me and him from the legacy Jonah left behind. "They want to sell the ranch," Mason said, voice hoarse. "Split profits. Leave us with nothing." Anger flared in my chest, but I tempered it. Fire needs control to become strength. "We will not let that happen," I said firmly. Mason's eyes scanned mine, searching for the mother he used to know, the one who guided him when he lost his way. I let him find her. "Thank you," he whispered, "for not giving up on me." Just then, headlights cut across the window, sharp, purposeful beams slicing through the dusk. Tires crunched to a stop outside. Footsteps, voices, a stern knock. Mason stiffened. "That's them." Before I could respond, the door swung open without my permission. Jenna Pike stepped inside, wielding a clipboard like a badge of conquest. "Mrs. Calder," she announced loudly, "we are filing for immediate guardianship due to concerns over your mental competency." Sloan appeared behind her, almost serene, and stepping out from the car, adjusting his cufflinks like a man who already owned the land beneath his feet. Harlan Duval, the predator, finally stepped into the light. Mason's voice trembled as he breathed one word. "No." Harlan smirked. "Son, you signed the papers. You're just here for the ride." Mason looked at me, fear and rage swirling as one. This was the moment Jonah had once warned me about, the moment when a mother becomes the last wall standing. I did not yell. I did not flinch. I simply took one step forward and said, steady as stone, "You will not take what is mine." Morning light barely touched the ranch when we drove to the courthouse. Mason sat beside me, silent, hands clasped so tight his knuckles were white. He looked like a man walking toward judgment, unsure whether he would be forgiven or condemned. I kept my eyes forward. I had already chosen the future. It was time for the world to catch up. Inside, the courthouse smelled of polished wood and old justice, heavy and unyielding. Evelyn Shore, the court-appointed evaluator, sat waiting with her file open, pen poised like she already knew the truth she would write. Across the room, Sloan and Jenna whispered together, heads bowed, eyes sharp. Harlan lingered near the back, leaning against a pillar with the casual arrogance of someone who thought laws were suggestions. Mason avoided his wife's gaze. Instead, he looked at me, like a drowning man finally swimming toward shore. The judge entered. Court began. Jenna stood first. Her voice was silky, confident, rehearsed to perfection. "Your Honor, my clients are deeply concerned for Mrs. Calder's safety and well-being. Her recent erratic decisions show that she may not be capable of overseeing significant assets. We believe temporary guardianship by her son is necessary for the protection of the family and the property." Every word was a knife wrapped in silk. Evelyn adjusted her glasses. "Mrs. Calder," she said kindly, "we will hear your side shortly." Dr. Priya Menon entered through the side door, nodding respectfully toward me before taking the stand. She opened her file calmly. "I evaluated Mrs. Calder last week," she stated. "She demonstrates full cognitive capacity. Her memory and judgment are intact. There is no medical basis for guardianship." Sloan stiffened. Jenna tried not to show her irritation. The judge's eyes flicked toward Mason. His shoulders dropped a little, as if a weight had eased, but Dr. Menon wasn't done. I also reviewed notes from her longtime physician and, she continued, interviewed individuals familiar with her management of the ranch. All confirm she is highly responsible and competent. Then, she delivered the blow that cracked their entire case. I believe the petition for guardianship is not based on concern, but control. A quiet gasp rippled through the room. Sloane's composure faltered. Harlan's jaw tensed. And Mason looked like someone had just opened a window in a suffocating room. Next, Evelyn spoke. She wasn't dramatic, just devastatingly clear. I visited the ranch, she said. I observed Mrs. Calder's daily functioning. She manages finances, property tasks, and safety measures with confidence. I also reviewed recent incidents, including missing security footage and unauthorized attempts to access her home. Jenna stepped forward to object, but Evelyn raised a hand. And, she continued, I examined financial ties between petitioners and a third party, Mr. Harlan Duval. Harlan stilled. Evelyn turned toward the judge with the gravity of someone who has seen too much truth twisted into lies. This guardianship request is inappropriate, she concluded. I strongly recommend it be denied. The judge nodded slowly. Motion denied. Mrs. Calder retains full authority. The gavel cracked, and everything they built collapsed in an instant. Sloane's face drained of color. Harlan pushed off the pillar, fists clenched. Jenna snapped her briefcase shut like a trap with no prey inside. But the real break happened when Mason turned to Sloane. His voice, barely more than a breath, cut deeper than any shout. You lied to me! Sloane blinked rapidly, trying to recover. Mason, baby, No, he said. No more. His hand fell away from hers. The wedding ring he wore suddenly looked like a shackle he couldn't wait to remove. Harlan's mask dropped. We still have options. She will fold. Mason turned to him, something fierce finally rising in his eyes. I'm done listening to you. Sloane's voice sharpened into panic. We're a family. You don't even know what that word means, he replied. The courtroom seemed to shrink around her. Suddenly, she wasn't the queen of the narrative. She was exposed, cornered, and then came the final blow. Evelyn tapped her pen. One more thing, she said. I reviewed medical records provided for Mrs. Whitaker. Sloane froze. There is no pregnancy, Evelyn said. And there never was. Time stopped. Mason's breath hitched in his chest. He looked at Sloane, desperate for a denial that would never come. Sloane? His voice cracked. Tell me she's wrong. Sloane's jaw worked, searching for a script that no longer existed. We were going to. You used my mother's love against her, he whispered. She stepped toward him, but he backed away like her touch would burn. The judge dismissed us, but no one moved for a long moment. The silence in the room wasn't empty. It was judgment. It was consequence. When we finally exited the courtroom, Sloane reached for Mason again. We can fix this, she insisted. Mason stepped aside. No yelling, no anger, just finality. We're done, he said. Harlan cursed under his breath and stormed out, leaving Sloane abandoned in every way that mattered. I walked with my son out into the daylight. The breeze brushed lightly against us, as though the earth itself celebrated a curse lifted. Mason looked lost. But sometimes a man must fall apart before he can stand upright. He swallowed hard and whispered, Mom, I'm so sorry. I took his hand. We'll talk when you're ready. Because healing takes its time. And forgiveness is an earned gift. But one thing was certain. They tried to take my life apart. Instead, they destroyed their own. Mason followed me home after the courthouse, driving slow like every mile needed forgiveness to pave the way. When we reached the ranch, the sun hovered low over the hills, turning the cottonwoods into silhouettes against a golden sky. It was a peaceful scene, but peace feels fragile when you've lived through a storm. We stood for a moment near the porch. He looked at the front door the way a child looks at a doctor's office, wanting to go in, but afraid of what waits inside. "Come in," I said softly. He nodded, shoulders drooping. We walked into the kitchen. The familiar scent of brewed tea still lingered from that morning. Mason traced his fingers along the counter edge, an old habit from when he was a boy waiting for cookies to cool. He was silent too long. Finally, I spared him the weight of starting. "You don't owe me an apology," I said. "You owe yourself understanding." His throat tightened. "I let her hurt you. You trusted her," I replied. "That isn't a crime. Loving the wrong person only becomes a mistake if you refuse to learn from it." His eyes glistened. He looked down at his hands, like he didn't recognize them anymore. "I don't know who I am without her." I reached out, my voice gentle but firm. "You don't go to find yourself in someone else's shadow. You walk into the light until you cast your own." His breath shook. For a moment, we stood in silence, mother and son, rebuilding a bridge plank by careful plank. "Sit," I finally told him. "There's something you need to read." I walked to my bedroom. The safe opened with its familiar click. The envelope with Jonah's handwriting waited inside. Strong, steady ink that had survived time and grief. I returned and placed it into Mason's hands. "This is from your father," I said. "He wrote this because he knew life would test us, and he trusted you to rise." Mason hesitated before breaking the seal. When he unfolded the letter, his shoulders curled inward as though bracing for impact. He read silently, lips parting with each line. I knew the exact words hitting him, because they once hit me too. "If our son forgets the value of our land or the strength of the woman who protects it, help him remember who you are." Tears slipped down Mason's cheeks. He didn't wipe them away. "I forgot him," he whispered. "I forgot everything he taught me." "No," I corrected gently. "You forgot yourself." He lowered the letter, his hands trembling. "I hurt you so badly." "You did. There was no point in pretending otherwise. And I don't know how to make it right." I took the letter from him and placed it on the table, smoothing the creases. Making it right isn't about begging forgiveness. It's about earning trust. He nodded slowly, absorbing each word like medicine, both bitter and healing. "I want to try," he said. "Tell me what I need to do." My heart cracked, open and raw. This moment was everything I had hoped for without daring to hope. "First," I said, "you stand up for what's right. Not for me, for yourself. You send a message to the court withdrawing every petition filed against me." He pulled out his phone and typed. His voice steadied as he read aloud. "I, Mason Calder, withdraw all claims for guardianship, effective immediately." He hit send. A breath I didn't know I was holding left my chest. He looked at his phone screen like it was the first decision he'd made without someone else pushing his hand. "You're not done," I said quietly. "Healing takes action." He nodded. "What's next?" "You face your choices, and you take responsibility for what comes after." His jaw clenched, but he didn't flinch. "I'll do whatever it takes." The sun dipped lower. Rafe arrived, stepping onto the porch with his usual quiet presence. He opened the door, about to call out, but stopped short when he saw Mason's tear-streaked face. The look Rafe gave me was one of hope, a tiny seed beginning to grow. "I found something," Rafe said gently, holding up a set of keys tied with a frayed red cord. My breath caught. "The master keys," he nodded. "Dropped in the ditch near the north fence, probably thrown when they realized you were onto them." Relief warmed my chest, not just because the keys had returned, but because someone had finally thrown away the wrong path. Miriam came over soon after, carrying a folded blanket she insisted Mason wrap around his shoulders. He accepted it with a small, grateful smile. She squeezed my hand on her way out, her eyes filled with quiet pride. Later, after everyone left, Mason stood by the old screen door. Outside, fireflies blinked along the edge of the pasture. He turned to me. "Mom, can I stay here tonight?" My heart answered before my voice did. "Yes," I said. "You're home." He hugged me for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, a real embrace, full of sorrow and strength. Our tears mixed, but neither of us apologized for them. Some tears clean out the poison. After he went to his room, I sat alone in the dim kitchen. Jonah's photo watched from the mantel, steady, approving. "You'd be proud," I whispered, because the ranch wasn't just land. It was a place where roots held steady, even when the heart wandered. It was where a son found his way back. And tonight, for the first time since the wedding, I didn't fear tomorrow. The next morning arrived gentle and slow, sunlight stretching across the kitchen as if cautiously asking permission to enter. I found Mason already awake, sitting at the table with a mug clasped in both hands. His hair was a mess, his eyes tired, but there was color in his face again, a hint of life returning. "Morning," he said. It was a single word, but it carried more sincerity than any apology could. I poured myself tea and sat across from him. For a while, we just listened to the soft sounds of morning, wind brushing the cottonwoods, the distant cluck of chickens, the quiet creak of old wood settling into a new day. "I've been thinking," Mason started, voice steady. "I want to make this right, really make it right." I nodded. "Then start where it hurts the most." He swallowed, understanding exactly what I meant. The town hall meeting happened every Saturday morning during the fall. Neighbors gathering to share announcements and concerns. It had been 3 days since the courtroom revelation, and people in a small town don't need more than 3 minutes to spread a story. The whispers had reached every porch and grocery aisle by now. If Mason wanted redemption, this was where it must begin. We drove into town together. He parked and inhaled deeply, bracing himself for the weight of consequences. When he entered the community hall, voices dimmed, conversations paused. Some faces softened, others hardened. Betrayal leaves marks, especially when it happens in public. Mason walked to the front where a microphone waited. His hands shook slightly before he steadied them on the podium. "I've made mistakes," he began. "Huge ones." The room held its breath. I let pride decide for me. I let fear decide for me. And worst of all, I let someone else decide who my mother was. His voice cracked, but he continued. "I hurt the one person who loved me without condition." Miriam, sitting in the front row, pressed a tissue to her chest. Rafe crossed his arms, but his eyes softened. "My mother deserves respect," Mason said. "She deserves trust." And I took both away. He glanced back at me, tears gathering. "I'm sorry, Mom. And I'm sorry to all of you who watched me lose myself." He stepped away from the microphone, cheeks flushed with sincerity. The applause didn't come all at once. It started in a single corner, slow and gentle, but soon it swelled into a wave. Not thunderous, not celebratory, just warm and real. Mason walked back to me. I stood up, meeting him with a nod that said, "Keep going." He wasn't done yet. "Rafe," he said, turning to the man who had watched over this land longer than Mason had been alive. "I'd like your help, if you'll have me." Rafe raised an eyebrow. "With what?" "With rebuilding Dad's old gate." Time stopped for a moment. The wooden gate had stood for decades, crafted by Jonah's calloused hands, but it had fallen into disrepair recently, symbolic in ways we hadn't dared voice. Now, Mason was willing to put in the sweat required to mend what he helped break. Rafe gave a slow, approving nod. "I'll fetch the tools." Back at the ranch, Mason rolled up his sleeves. He and Rafe hauled lumber and tools to the old gate line. The sun bore down, sweat gathered, and sawdust filled the air. Mason worked hard, not to prove something, but to restore it. Every hammer strike felt like a heartbeat coming back to life. I stood nearby, watching. My hands itched to help, but this was his work to do, his redemption to earn. While the men labored, Miriam joined me with sweet tea and a soft smile. "Your boy is finding his way home," she said. "He is," I replied, my voice thick. By afternoon, the gate stood tall again, solid, beautiful, a creation reborn. Mason stepped back, chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. Rafe clapped him on the back. One of those rare gestures from a man who says little but feels deeply. I approached, holding something small in my palm, Jonah's old compass keychain. Mason looked at it, eyes wide with recognition. "This belonged to your father," I said. "He carried it every time he fixed anything on this land." Mason swallowed a sob. He took the keychain gently, like it might crumble if handled too roughly. "I'll do better," he whispered. "I know," I replied. "And this is how it starts." As evening painted gold across the fields, we gathered on the porch. Just me, my son, and two friends who had become family. Laughter flickered back into our world in little bursts. Awkward at first, but growing easier with each story we shared. The ranch breathed easier. So did I. Before heading to bed, Mason paused at the door. "Mom," he said softly, "thank you for giving me a second chance." I touched his cheek, the way I used to when he was small. "You're my son," I said. "There will always be a way back, as long as you choose to walk it." He nodded, wiping at his eyes before stepping inside. That night, lying beneath the familiar rafters of my home, I allowed myself a rare gift: hope without fear. We weren't finished. We still had battles ahead. Scars don't disappear just because peace knocks once. But today was a beginning, and some beginnings feel as powerful as justice itself. 2 years have passed since the day I was thrown out of my son's wedding. I can still hear the echo of his voice in that hall, cold and sharp. I can still feel the sting of humiliation from hundreds of staring eyes. But now, that memory no longer owns me. It simply reminds me of how far we've come. This morning, I walked the ranch as dawn spread across the land like a soft blanket. The irrigation channels trickled smoothly, clear and alive. We've restored the fields, planted new alfalfa, nursed the orchard back from drought. And in the evenings, the horses wander freely, tails flicking fireflies from the air. Healing isn't loud. It doesn't arrive in grand speeches. It comes in quiet mornings like this, when your heart doesn't ache, and your home finally feels like home again. Inside the house, I heard footsteps creaking down the hallway. Mason emerged, rubbing his eyes, hair disheveled. Not hungover, not weighed down by regret. Just a man with purpose waiting in his bones. "Ready?" I asked him. He nodded, a small, genuine smile tugging the corners of his mouth. He buttoned the shirt he wore only on days that mattered, the one Jonah passed down to him when he turned 30. For a long time, Mason wasn't sure he deserved to wear it. Today, he didn't question it. We stepped outside together. The air smelled of wet grass and sun-warmed wood. Rafe was already near the main gate, oiling the hinges. Miriam stood nearby, a hand pressed to her heart like she was watching a miracle unfold. They had become the witnesses to our hardest chapters. It felt right for them to witness the closing of one. Mason walked to the gate, running his hand across the smooth cedar rails he rebuilt. That gate had stood broken once, just like him. Now, both were stronger than before. "I want to say something," he murmured. "Then say it," I replied. He turned to face me fully, the morning sun hitting his eyes and turning them bright, like Jonah's. "You saved this family," he said. "Not by fighting loud, not by shaming anyone. You saved us by holding the line, by knowing who you are even when I didn't." Emotion rose in my chest like a tide pressing against shore. But I steadied myself. This moment belonged to him. "I want to earn back everything I lost," he added. "Not through shortcuts, not through money or excuses, through work, through time." There was no trembling in his voice, no doubt, just truth. I reached into my pocket and closed my fingers around a single key. Not the whole ring, not all the authority, just one. I placed the key in his palm. It looked small there, almost delicate, but he held it as though it carried the weight of the whole ranch. "This is temporary," I told him. "Not a gift, a responsibility." He nodded solemnly. "I'll spend the next 10 years proving I deserve the rest." The promise settled into the morning air, strong as any contract filed in court. "Are you ready?" I asked. He looked toward the gate. Then he looked back at me. "Let's do it," he said. Together we lifted the heavy gate chain. The metal links rattled like a drum roll beneath the sky. We wrapped it around the latch and pulled it through the lock. The sound of the key sliding into place was soft, but it echoed farther than anyone could hear. Click. That click was justice. Not the kind delivered by gavels or headlines. The kind delivered by time, clarity, and the steady spine of a mother who refused to be erased. Miriam clapped her hands over her mouth, tears spilling freely. Rafe tipped his hat, respectful and proud. The land itself seemed to sigh with relief. I looked at Mason, and he was different. Not the boy who shouted, not the man who followed lies, but someone new, rebuilt from broken pieces into something stronger, humbler, wiser. "Some justice shouts," I said quietly, staring at the gate now sealed against the world. He glanced at me, waiting. "But mine," I whispered, "simply locks the gate." Mason inhaled deeply, as though breathing in a new life. "Thank you," he said, "for letting me come back." "You came back on your own," I corrected. "I just kept the light on." We walked the fence line together, checking each post side by side. It wasn't symbolic. It was real work, and real work is how trust repairs itself. Later that afternoon, Arthur stopped by with news. A local women's group invited me to speak at their annual conference. Women Protecting the Land, me, a widowed rancher who once thought silence made her invisible. Now, silence was the strength that saved generations. I'll think about it, I told him, but I already knew my answer. As the sun lowered, casting everything in golden warmth, I stood at our gate one last time. 2 years ago, that gate had been the line Mason forced me to cross, with shame chasing me into the night. Now it was the line that protected us both. He turned to me and said softly, "I'll be here, every day." I smiled. "That's the plan." He nodded once, resolute. "I'll spend 10 years earning the whole ring," he promised. "One good day at a time." I slipped my arm around him, leaning my head lightly against his shoulder. The breeze rustled through the cottonwoods like applause. The ranch didn't just survive, it healed. And the woman who once walked away from her son's wedding in silence now understood the power of that silence. It had become the voice that restored everything worth holding on to. The key ring remained mostly in my hand. But the future we locked in place together.